You know, it's funny. When you look at someone through rose-colored glasses, all the red flags just look like flags.
This quote is from a conversation between Wanda and BoJack in BoJack Horseman Season 2, and it's one of the more memorable lines from the show. I watched this season when it came out half a decade ago, and the line stuck with me for a while, and every time I rewatched the show, it stuck out even more. It wasn't until recently that I started to critically think about the quote, and I wondered, does it make sense? Like, is it literally reasonable, or is it just profound? What do I know? Do I know things? Let's find out. A lot of TV shows and movies have quotes like these that end up being Twitter bio fodder, so I'm taking a look at some lines of dialogue that seem to resonate with audiences and judging how well they work in the context of the show or film, and as standalone pieces of wisdom or advice. This isn't some comprehensive list of all famous lines, but these stood out to me for one reason or another, and I think others would agree, for better or for worse. Let's get started.
Let them make the mistakes. And when your enemy's making mistakes, don't interrupt them.
The movie Moneyball answers the question, what if someone licensed the film rights to Baseball Reference? But it also gave way for a ton of great performances, stage building, chilling dramatization, and most importantly for this video, some good quotes. Brad Pitt plays Billy Beane, the general manager for the Oakland Athletics, who tries to game the system by putting together a motley roster of guys with a low payroll to compete in Major League Baseball. Now, granted, I have no clue how Billy Beane acts in real life, or what his mannerisms are. In fact, I've seldom seen photos of him, but for the sake of the movie, Brad Pitt does a fantastic job of being a hardened, determined leader. A lot of this comes from his dialogue, and he has plenty of memorable moments, like, do you believe in this thing or not, or he gets on base a lot. But I plucked this one specifically because it doesn't try to carry that much weight by itself. This quote comes during a time-lapse montage of the Athletics finally playing the kind of baseball that Beane wanted them to and built the team for, and the line goes by pretty quickly in the movie. The quote itself, the idea of inaction being a choice of action, is also sound wisdom. Sometimes doing nothing can be as impactful as a grand gesture, so it does a good job of encapsulating the context of the story, but it also stands on its own. This line is actually derived from a quote attributed to Napoleon, which goes, when your opponent is making a false move, it is wise not to disturb him. So it doesn't exactly win points for originality, but I think the use of it in Moneyball is still effective. It captures Beane's tone, the situation the A's are in, the general mantra of, let them play their way, we'll win our way, all of that. 5 out of 5, Moneyball.
You don't know how this feels!
It's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything.
Let's knock out another Pitt quote really quickly. This one is actually similar to the Moneyball line in that it comes from a string of dialogue and it's punctuated a bit more, but I like how it blends in. This one comes as Tyler Durden gives Edward Norton a chemical burn and spouts off a lot of lofty life lessons, and this is the one that does the trick for Norton. Now, as a standalone quote, it doesn't really hold up well. The essence of the quote is sort of reasonable. The more responsibilities and the more put together your public appearance, the more you're hamstrung as to what you can do without drawing suspicion or concern. That makes some sense, but you can do that whenever you want, and it's awfully far-reaching. Granted, as the audience later learns, this is just him talking to himself after doing something really stupid, so in that regard, it's almost more of a justification, a coping strategy, which I can get behind. I think it's worth pointing out how this quote relates to the story. I've never read the book Fight Club, but from what I can gather, the ending actually shows the narrator failing to blow up the buildings with Project Mayhem and waking up in the hospital to Project Mayhem members saying they want Tyler back. In the movie, the buildings start blowing up and it just ends there. The reason I bring this up is because the way the movie ends reinforces this quote. Norton pushed himself to the absolute limit, and now he has a moment of freedom. However, the book ending suggests the absolute opposite of this quote. The narrator has lost everything, but he certainly does not have that same freedom. Anyway, the quote's alright, 3 out of 5.
If I have to, I will spend every day of the rest of my life hunting the Avatar. I know it's my destiny to capture him.
You know, Prince Zuko, Destiny is a funny thing. You never know how things are going to work out, but if you keep an open mind and an open heart, I promise you will find your own destiny someday.
This quote from Uncle Iroh in Avatar: The Last Airbender seems like a good bridge from the last one. They both reference how your future is determined and altered by what you do in the present, but I like this one a lot more. As a standalone line, it's perhaps a little overly prophetic and ultimately more profound than thought-provoking, but the meat of the quote is still true, and the context it's provided in suits it perfectly. At this point in the show, Zuko has abandoned his family and the Fire Nation to go help Aang learn firebending to help defeat Ozai, and he has a flashback at the Western Air Temple from when he was there with Iroh to capture the Avatar. Zuko, at this point, is hell-bent on finding him. He thinks it will be the only way for him to return to the Fire Nation after being banished. He thinks that's how to create and uphold his legacy. We all know Iroh is the absolute best, and this quote cements it. He goes through so much in his life to land him in the retrospective, understanding place he is during this quote. Losing his son to the war pushes him to realize that leading an army that does nothing but terrorize so many in the world for the sake of domination is wrong. All of this is why this quote to Zuko feels so sincere. Like Iroh before him, Zuko no longer subscribes to the 100 Years' War and what the Fire Nation is attempting to do. Call it a little on the nose if you want, but I find this to be one of the best iterations of Iroh's wisdom. 4 out of 5.
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
This is the beginning of the life section of the video, and this line from Ferris Bueller is easily one of the most notable. Everybody knows it, or has at least heard it at one point or another. On some level, this quote fits perfectly with the movie itself. Ferris Bueller's Day Off is not a movie that tries to say much. There's a certain sweetness that we see from Ferris wanting to spend time with Cameron because he fears that their relationship won't be the same once he goes to college, and that's nice, but other than that, it's all about fun. A day of skipping school, avoiding his loser principal, going out with his friends, and getting into and out of hijinks. That's cool, and I think it's good for that. So in that context, the quote embodies the movie well. It's also a feel-good line. I think everybody at one point or another wishes that time could stop even for just a minute to enjoy the fun moments or have another hour in the day to actually reflect on themselves and take in the world around them. The line plays into the escapism of the movie, which is a bit ironic since he is speaking directly to the camera when he says it, but it works. I don't think it's worth getting too into the dirt of the details with this one because it's been played to death, but I at least thought it was worth mentioning that it fits, and it holds a semblance of truth. It's not amazing advice or anything, but I can dig it. 3 out of 5.
Hey, here's the deal. When life gives you lemons, just say fuck the lemons and bail.
Yeah, no, you said it, totally.
This is a quote that is impossible not to enjoy at some level. A classic switch-up of the original cliche, and it really could not come from a better character in a better movie. This one obviously is not designed to be serious advice, and that's okay. That doesn't make it any less memorable, and I think the nonchalant goofiness of Paul Rudd's character hits the line perfectly. It's also followed by another fantastic line in,
Come on, the weather outside is weather.
so he doubles down on the funny. Again, not a ton to say on this one. Frankly, it doesn't really fit the profound profile of this video, but I couldn't bring myself to take it out, so 5 out of 5.
My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get.
Here's a dumb simile. Okay, sorry, it's not that bad, and I think being so overly quoted hurts this Forrest Gump line a lot. First of all, this one is actually misquoted a lot to say life is like a box of chocolates, and it rarely includes the "my mama always said," which are both pretty important parts of the quote. His mom had a life that was full of surprises, so that's reasonable, and the quote is also retrospective when he says it. He's saying that when she looked back at her life and all of the ridiculous things that happened to her and Forrest throughout it, it feels as random as anything, which is also the point of the movie. What it is not trying to say is that anything that will happen in your life is random and impossible to suss out. In fact, it sort of says the opposite. Forrest's mom thought everything would be a little more normal, and it wasn't until he kept falling into all of these great situations did she realize how unpredictable it could be. Plus, it's still a lot better than the next mama quote he says, which is,
Mom always said there's an awful lot you can tell about a person by their shoes. Where they going? Where they been?
and would earn a 0 out of 5 because, no, you cannot. And yes, I understand the symbolism of the shoes and how he runs. That's cute. That doesn't mean the quote makes any sense at all. Anyway, the first quote is definitely better, but that doesn't mean it's good. First of all, you never know what you're going to get in life is probably the lamest piece of wisdom ever because of how obvious it is. I'm not saying it was supposed to be some crazy insight, but for how often people quote the line, you would think it had directions to the Fountain of Youth encrypted in it or something. Secondly, are boxes of chocolate that random? I mean, I guess you don't know exactly what's in a box of chocolate, like those big ones that he has, but you never know what you're gonna get? Alright, I'm cynical. Whatever. 2 out of 5.
One thing about trains. It doesn't matter where they're going. What matters is deciding to get on.
And you thought I hated that last Tom Hanks quote? Okay, to be fair, this is not a quote that I think was intended to be irreverent or even necessarily life advice at all, but it is so silly that I have to include it here. At the beginning of the movie, this kid does not want to get on the Polar Express, so conductor Hanks makes fun of him before he finally gets on and finds the meaning of Christmas and movie. As a little tongue-in-cheek reference at the end of the film, conductor Hanks says that quote about the trains. Okay, neat little callback, except that it not only is terrible general advice, it also does not apply whatsoever in this situation. For the sake of the plot, yes, this kid does need to get on the train, but the destination of the train is in fact paramount. If he doesn't get to the North Pole, he doesn't learn the meaning of Christmas and the values and whatever. That is the whole point of the train ride. Secondly, and I'm not sure that I need to go too far into this, but do not ever get on a train if you do not know where it's going. Do not assume that all trains go to the same place. 1 out of 5.
You know, it's funny. When you look at someone through rose-colored glasses, all the red flags just look like flags.
Alright, let's end it with a quote that caused me to think about this whole concept in the first place. Like I mentioned, I quite liked this quote when I first heard it, and then when I heard it again, but I started to have my doubts. It's sort of a mixed metaphor, but it's also very clear what the writers are trying to say. You're prone to ignore potential issues in a relationship when your lust takes over. That's a simple yet true statement. I think it holds a lot of value realistically, and that certainly seems to be the case in the context of BoJack. In the show, BoJack falls head over heels for Wanda because she is unaware of him and his shortcomings, but that's just the first variable of the equation because BoJack is still not capable of opening himself up to be loved. Once Wanda realizes that, the game is over between them, because even though she thought that it was rocky but sustainable, she later understands that BoJack has to get over his fear of acceptance before there's any chance of having a relationship. Thus, all the red flags just look like flags. The main part of the quote I began to question was the nature of confusing a red flag with just a flag. What is a flag? Like a checkpoint, right? Does that mean that Wanda simply overlooked all of these things entirely? Well, obviously not, because she says she understands it all, and that's what drove her to become so distant from BoJack in the first place. That must mean that she understood these issues were cropping up, but mischaracterized them? Okay, but they got into things super quickly. She was hesitant about getting back into the world after being out of the world for decades already, so why was she so adamant about this relationship compared to how she was treating the rest of her life? And then I realized that maybe I was looking a little too far into it. Maybe there's a reason TV shows and movies are hours-long pieces of art, because each line of dialogue is not intended to pack in as much information, wisdom, and nuance as a page is Shakespeare. Maybe the only reason I'm being so critical of all these quotes is because I'm used to seeing people put them on Facebook posts and use them as life advice, when in reality, they're just designed by talented writers to add to a story or character development and not be taken so literally. 1 out of 5 for Oscar. But the BoJack quote, that's a 4 out of 5. Good stuff there.